A bomb goes off in a Birmingham church. 4 little girls never make it out. A peaceful march ends in blood on a bridge in Selma. The FBI watches, but doesn't stop the beatings. And through it all, one man refuses to back down. This isn't fiction. This isn't ancient history. This is America just a generation ago. In March, Book 3, Congressman John Lewis takes us to the front lines of the civil rights movement, to the chaos, the courage, and the cost. If you think you know what happened, think again. This is the story they don't teach in school.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to BookPodCastZone. I'm Emma.
And I'm John.
Here to help us unpack the profound insights from our sources.
Today, we're really embarking on an intense and I think incredibly important journey. We're diving deep into March, Book 3.
Right, the final volume of the graphic novel trilogy by the late Congressman John Lewis and Andrew Aydin.
Exactly. And we're focusing specifically on the audiobook version, which just adds this whole other layer. It really brings this pivotal period to life with a kind of immersive quality that's hard to describe.
It really does. The narration makes it incredibly immediate.
Our mission today, well, it's to go way beyond the textbook summaries. You know, the ones you might have skimmed in high school?
The dates and the main events.
Right. We want to actually try and understand the emotional intensity, the sheer historical weight of it all, and the immense personal cost.
The cost is key.
Absolutely. The cost of the civil rights movement's most sort of climactic years. And we get to see it all through the eyes of John Lewis himself.
A man who was literally on the front lines, day after day, risking everything.
It's not just a history lesson, is it? It feels more like a testament to courage, to sacrifice, and just this unwavering pursuit of justice.
That's a great way to put it. Lewis's firsthand account, it's so raw and personal, and then Andrew Aydin's narrative structure gives it clarity, context. It's this unique blend.
Yeah, it really pulls you into the 60s, into that turbulence, a decade that, I mean, it fundamentally reshaped America.
And what I find so compelling about March, Book 3, especially in the audiobook, is that immediacy you mentioned. It's not just reciting facts.
Yeah.
It transforms these, historical events into something deeply emotional. It really lays bare the human element of the struggle, the fear, the hope, the exhaustion.
And Lewis wasn't just watching, was it? He was central, a leader in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Right. And it's his vulnerability, coupled with that incredible commitment, even when facing just unspeakable violence. That's what resonates so powerfully.
That structure Aydin provides is crucial too, isn't it? It helps make sense of these really complex, often chaotic events without sort of sanitizing them or losing their power.
Definitely. It's a powerful example of how personal stories can illuminate history, much more than dry facts ever could. You feel like you're almost walking in their shoes, grappling with those same impossible choices.
And that deep immersion, it starts right away. Boom! The audiobook just throws you headfirst into this absolutely devastating moment, September 15th, 1963.
The bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama?
Yeah, it's the stark, brutal introduction to this volume, to this period. And the cost is immediate and unthinkable. 4 young girls.
Addie Mae Collins, Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley. Just children attending Sunday school.
It's even now thinking about it, it's like a physical blow, a gut punch, as the source material kind of describes it. It's just this chilling reminder of the hate, the systemic violence that was just there, permeating everything.
Absolutely. And for a community, especially one that's actively striving for peace and equality through nonviolence, what does an act like that even mean?
It's hard to fathom. It wasn't just attacking bricks and mortar, was it?
Not at all. It was an attack on the heart of the Black community, on their sacred space, on their children, on their very humanity. The goal was terror. Pure and simple.
Leaving behind just this profound shock, this grief, and you'd imagine just this almost unbearable outrage.
Of course. And that raises a critical question the book forces us to confront. How does a movement fundamentally committed to nonviolence even begin to process an act of such calculated, murderous hatred?
Right. How do you respond to that without losing your soul, without succumbing to the very thing you're fighting against?
To really grasp the enormity of that bombing, we absolutely have to understand Birmingham in 1963. It wasn't just any southern city.
No. The book paints it as a real flashpoint, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe the flashpoint.
Precisely. Nicknamed Birmingham for a reason. Jim Crow wasn't subtle there. It was overt, legally enforced, and maintained through constant terror and intimidation by figures like Bull Connor, the Commissioner of Public Safety.
So segregation wasn't just custom, it was the law.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Schools, buses, restaurants, parks, water fountains, waiting rooms, libraries. Every single facet of public life was rigidly segregated, and the enforcement was brutal.
And the black churches, like 16th Street Baptists, they were more than just places to pray, weren't they? Oh, much more. They were the absolute heart of the black community. They were community centers, organizational hubs, places for education, for strategizing, for building morale. They were symbols of resilience, of strength, of hope.
So in a way, they were seen as a threat by the segregationists.
A direct threat. Because they were the places where the movement organized, where people gathered courage, where leadership emerged. Targeting a church, especially one as significant as 16th Street, was a deliberate strike against the movement's infrastructure and its spiritual core.
And that makes the bombing even more strategically evil, if you can say that.
It was intended to demoralize, to terrify people into submission, to break the spirit of resistance. But ironically, as horrific as it was, it had the opposite effect in many ways.
How so?
It amplified the outrage. Locally, yes, but crucially, nationally and even internationally. It dragged the raw, ugly reality of racial hatred and violence out of the shadows and into the living rooms of people who might have previously tried to ignore it.
It made it undeniable.
Undeniable. It connected the specific, horrific act directly to the broader systemic struggle against racism and segregation. You can see those images, hear those stories, and not understand what was at stake.
And right in the middle of processing this horror is John Lewis. He's young, early 20s, but already a key leader in SNCC.
Yes, SNCC was often on the cutting edge, pushing the boundaries, often more confrontational in a nonviolent way than some of the older organizations.
So as someone so deeply committed to the philosophy and strategy of nonviolence, how does SNCC even begin to cope with that level of shock and grief, especially when the victims are children?
The book really delves into that internal struggle, and it's profound. You have to imagine the raw human emotion, the anger, the visceral desire perhaps for retaliation. It must have been overwhelming.
I can't even imagine.
Yet Lewis's commitment and SNCC's official stance remained firmly rooted in nonviolence. But March makes it clear this wasn't easy. It wasn't a passive acceptance. It was a constant, active, difficult choice.
So how do you maintain that? How do you hold on to that moral fortitude when faced with that? The murder of children in a church.
It required immense discipline. It involved deep philosophical discussions, spiritual grounding for many, and a strategic understanding that violence would only play into the hands of the oppressors. It would undermine the moral high ground they sought to occupy.
So it wasn't just turn the other cheek in a passive way.
No, it was about channeling that outrage, that grief, into constructive, nonviolent action. It was about using the horror to expose the injustice, to appeal to the conscience of the nation, to demand change. They had to confront these incredibly deep ethical questions. How do we fight this evil without becoming like it?
The book does such a powerful job of showing that pressure, the internal debates, the sheer difficulty of sticking to that path.
Absolutely. And that internal struggle, that commitment, despite the horror, is central to understanding the movement's resilience and ultimate strength.
And you mentioned the bombing inadvertently galvanized national attention.
Yes, the sheer barbarity of it. Killing children in a house of worship. It shocked the conscience of many Americans who had perhaps been indifferent before. The images, the news reports, they couldn't be easily dismissed.
Did it force the federal government's hand? The Kennedy administration?
It certainly put immense pressure on them. The source notes and history confirms that the Kennedy administration was often cautious, sometimes slow to intervene directly in Southern racial issues, worried about political fallout with Southern Democrats.
Right, the political calculations.
Exactly. But the Birmingham bombing, coming after the violence against the Freedom Riders and the clashes in Birmingham earlier that year, made the situation impossible to ignore. It increased the demand for federal action, for civil rights legislation.
So the tragedy didn't break the movement's spirit.
Paradoxically, no. As March, Book 3 makes so clear, it fueled its resolve. It turned that despair, that grief, into a renewed, almost fierce determination. If this is what they were capable of, then the fight was more urgent than ever.
And this is where Lewis and Aydin's work really shines, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That combination of his personal experience and the clear narrative.
Absolutely. You're not just reading about the bombing. Lewis's perspective puts you there. You feel the shockwaves, the grief. You feel like you're standing in the rubble, grappling with those same impossible moral questions that Lewis and the other activists faced every single day.
You're not just learning history. You're feeling its weight, its urgency.
Precisely. And the incredible resilience it took to just keep going.
And just when you think things can't get more dangerous or more intense, March. Wick 3 takes us into the summer of 1964, Freedom Summer.
Right. SNCC's incredibly bold and incredibly dangerous initiative in Mississippi.
The focus was voter registration, right?
Yeah.
Trying to register black voters in the state most hostile to it.
Exactly. And the danger wasn't abstract. The book emphasizes this pervasive climate of fear. Beatings, false arrests, economic reprisals, bombings, and murder. These were common tactics used to maintain white supremacy.
So why Mississippi? Why focus the energy there, knowing it was maybe the most dangerous place they could go? Was it a strategic choice?
Oh, absolutely strategic. Mississippi was chosen precisely because it was the toughest nut to crack. It symbolized the absolute depths of resistance to black equality and voting rights in the Deep South.
What were the numbers like?
Yeah.
In terms of black voter registration?
Shockingly low. In 1964, estimates are that less than 7%, of eligible black citizens in Mississippi were registered to vote.
Less than 7%. That's staggering.
It is. And it wasn't due to apathy. It was the direct result of a state-sponsored system designed to prevent it.
What kind of obstacles are we talking about, beyond just intimidation?
We're talking about poll taxes they couldn't afford, literacy tests that were designed to be impossible for black applicants to pass. Registrars might ask them to interpret obscure sections of the state constitution.
While white applicants might be asked something simple or nothing at all.
Exactly. Plus, you had grandfather clauses still casting a shadow, complex residency requirements, and the constant threat of violence or losing your job, your home, your credit, if you even tried to register. The White Citizens Councils often enforced the economic pressure.
So the state itself was basically organized to deny this fundamental right.
Effectively, yes. It operated almost like a police state for its black population when it came to civil rights. Any attempt to assert those rights was met with swift, often brutal, repression.
And it's into that environment that SNCC decides to launch Freedom Summer, bringing in hundreds of volunteers, many of them white students from the North.
Which was itself a controversial strategy within the movement.
Right. The book touches on that. Concerns about safety, about whether it would shift the focus away from local black leadership.
But the hope was that bringing in white students from well-connected families would draw national attention and perhaps offer some measure of protection, that the country wouldn't ignore violence against them the way it ignored violence against black Mississippians.
A grim calculation, really.
A grim and tragically necessary one. And the danger became horrifyingly real almost immediately.
The disappearance of the 3 civil rights workers.
James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner. Chaney was a local black activist from Mississippi. Goodman and Schwerner were white activists from New York. They went missing in Neshoba County just weeks into Freedom Summer while investigating a church burning.
And their disappearance, and the later discovery of their bodies, that really brought the brutality home to the rest of the country, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It generated massive national and international headlines. President Johnson ordered a huge FBI investigation. It starkly exposed the depths of hatred and the willingness of Klan members, sometimes with collusion from local law enforcement, to resort to murder to maintain segregation.
It was a horrifying illustration of exactly what they were up against.
And it highlighted that stark contrast. Activists armed only with clipboards and voter registration forms, facing down people armed with guns, bombs, and institutional power.
And amidst this extreme danger, you have Lewis and the other SNCC organizers doing this painstaking day-by-day work. The book calls it the strategic brilliance of grassroots organizing.
It really was. It wasn't just about big marches, although those were important. It was about the slow, methodical, incredibly brave work of building trust, community by community, door by door.
Trying to convince people to register to vote when they knew, realistically, what the risks were.
Exactly. Imagine trying to persuade someone to risk their life, their family's safety, their livelihood, just for the chance to register, knowing they'd likely be turned away anyway or worse.
The personal anecdotes Lewis shares really bring this home. Like confronting hostile sheriffs walking down dusty roads knowing you're being watched.
That takes a kind of courage that's almost unimaginable. The audiobook, with its pacing, captures that constant tension, that underlying threat that was just always present.
And the book also doesn't shy away from the internal debates within SNCC, right?
Mm-hmm.
About strategy, about safety.
No, and that's important. It wasn't monolithic. There were intense discussions. How much risk was too much? Was nonviolence always the right tactic in the face of Klan violence? How do you protect people? These were life and death decisions being made by very young people under incredible pressure.
balancing that urgency for change with the need to keep people alive.
It's an almost impossible balance.
Um,
But through it all, what shines through is the power of that collective action.
How so?
Well, these efforts, these door-to-door campaigns, the freedom schools they set up to educate people, it was all part of a broader fight for basic democratic participation. They weren't just trying to get names on a list. They were fundamentally challenging the legitimacy of the entire Jim Crow power structure in Mississippi.
By asserting the right to vote, they were asserting their citizenship, their equality.
Precisely. And Lewis's raw storytelling, shaped so well by Aydin's structure, makes you, the listener, feel both the danger and the hope. You feel the fear walking up to that courthouse, but also the incredible resilience and determination of people who simply refuse to accept injustice. It's right there, in your ears.
It's an incredible testament to the human spirit. We've just scratched the surface, really, of the courage and sacrifice involved in that fight for voting rights during Freedom Summer.
Absolutely. The bravery is almost hard to comprehend today.
If you're finding this deep dive as compelling and, frankly, as moving as we are, please do take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue to bring these vital stories, these essential histories, to light.
It really does make a difference.
Now, let's continue to the next pivotal moment, where that grassroots struggle crashed headlong into national politics.
The 1964 Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City.
Right. After all the work and danger of Freedom Summer, Lewis and the newly formed Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, the MFDP, decided they couldn't just accept the status quo.
No, they organized a parallel delegation made up of black and white Mississippians who had been systematically excluded from the official all-white Democratic Party delegation from their state.
And they went to the DNC with a clear demand: seat us, not the segregationists. We're the ones loyal to the National Party's platform on civil rights.
This is where it gets really interesting, as the source says, because it forces this confrontation. Grassroots activism born out of terror and hope in Mississippi meets the calculations and compromises of high-stakes presidential politics.
How did the establishment react? President Johnson was heading for election. He didn't want chaos, right?
Exactly. Johnson was deeply concerned about alienating Southern white Democrats, the so-called Dixiecrats, who were crucial to his election strategy against Barry Goldwater. He saw the MFDP challenge as a major disruption.
So the stage was set for a showdown. And at the heart of the MFDP's case was some incredibly powerful testimony.
Absolutely pivotal testimony, particularly from Fannie Lou Hamer. The book describes her appearance before the Credentials Committee as electrifying, and that's almost an understatement.
Tell us about her. Who was Fannie Lou Hamer?
She was extraordinary, a sharecropper from Ruleville, Mississippi. She had only a 6th grade education, but possessed this incredible eloquence, this raw authenticity, and this unshakable courage. She'd become involved in the movement through SNCC and had lost her job and her home simply for trying to register to vote.
And what did she tell the committee?
She recounted in harrowing detail her own experience of being brutally beaten in a Winona, Mississippi jailhouse earlier that year just for attending a voter registration workshop. She described being beaten by police officers with blackjacks until she was black and blue, suffering permanent kidney damage.
And this was broadcast.
Yes, her testimony was carried live on national television. She spoke directly, powerfully about the violence and injustice faced by black Mississippians who simply wanted their constitutional rights. Her famous line, "Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hooks because our lives be threatened daily?" It just cut through everything.
Wow. Connecting that personal story to the bigger picture, that must have been incredibly impactful.
It was a turning point. Hamer's speech brought the raw, undeniable moral urgency of the movement directly into American living rooms. It bypassed the political spin. You couldn't hear her story, see her conviction, and not be moved, not question what was happening.
It demonstrated the sheer power of personal testimony and advocacy, didn't it? Making the abstract concrete and human.
Absolutely. Even though President Johnson actually tried to preempt her testimony by calling an impromptu press conference to draw the cameras away.
Seriously.
Yes, but the network still played her full testimony later that night. It was too powerful to ignore. It put immense moral pressure on the Democratic Party.
So with that kind of testimony, with the moral clarity of the MFDP's case, you'd think they'd win, right? That the party would seat them.
Logically, morally, yes. But politics rarely works that way, does it? Despite Hamer's testimony, despite the clear evidence of discrimination, the party leadership, particularly Johnson, working through allies like Hubert Humphrey, scrambled to find a compromise that wouldn't cause a Southern walkout.
And what was the compromise they offered?
They offered the MFDP 2 at-large seats, meaning they wouldn't represent Mississippi specifically, and they wouldn't have voting power on the floor. They also promised that future conventions, starting in 1968, would prohibit delegations seated through discriminatory practices.
2 symbolic seats. No real power after everything they had been through.
Exactly. The source calls it half measures, and for Lewis, Hamer, and the rest of the MFDP delegates, it felt like far less than half. It felt like a deep betrayal.
You can feel that frustration of compromise, Lewis describes. They'd put their lives on the line, they'd followed the rules, they'd presented an undeniable moral case, and this was the response.
It was crushing for many of them. They debated intensely whether to accept the compromise. Fannie Lou Hamer famously said, "We didn't come all this way for no 2 seats when all of us is tired." They ultimately rejected the offer.
What does that moment reveal, then, about the limits of political allyship, about the difference between stated values and political action?
It's a really sobering lesson, isn't it? It showed that even supposed allies, like the National Democratic Party under Johnson, might prioritize political expediency, keeping the party coalition together, winning the election over immediate moral justice, especially when siding fully with the activists meant alienating a powerful bloc of voters and politicians.
It suggests that allyship can be conditional, fragile.
Very much so. It revealed the deep complicity of the National Party in upholding, or at least accommodating, segregationist power in the South for political gain. They weren't willing to risk the wrath of the Dixiecrats, not yet.
So the MFDP challenge, even though they didn't get seated, was still a pivotal moment.
Absolutely pivotal, because it exposed this hypocrisy on a national stage. It forced the Democratic Party to confront its own contradictions regarding race. It laid bare the ugliness that the party structure was willing to tolerate.
And Lewis's perspective in March being right there in the thick of it.
It's invaluable. Combined with Aydin's contextualization, it's just a masterclass in political storytelling. You feel the hope going in, the tension on the convention floor, the backroom deals, the arguments, the heartbreak of that compromise offer, and the defiant dignity in rejecting it.
It really raises that fundamental question about moral clarity versus political calculation, doesn't it?
It does, and it shows that sometimes, even when you don't achieve your immediate goal, the act of challenging the system, of speaking truth to power, can fundamentally shift the ground beneath everyone's feet. The MFDP stand paved the way for future reforms within the party and kept the pressure on for broader civil rights legislation. Their loss was, in many ways, a long-term win for awareness and change.
From the smoke-filled rooms of the DNC, the focus shifts back to the streets, back to Alabama, and to perhaps the single most iconic confrontation of the entire movement.
Selma. The Selma to Montgomery marches in 1965.
And specifically, Bloody Sunday, March 7th, 1965. The images from the Edmund Pettus Bridge are just seared into history. The audiobook's portrayal is unflinching, visceral.
It has to be. It was a moment of unbridled, state-sanctioned violence against peaceful protesters.
Can you describe what happened? What Lewis, who's leading the march alongside Hosea Williams of SCLC, actually faced that day? The source mentions his brutal beating.
It was horrific. The marchers, about 600 of them, were walking from Selma towards Montgomery to demand voting rights. Alabama, under Governor George Wallace, was notoriously resistant. As they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, leaving Selma, they were met by a line of Alabama state troopers and local postmen, deputized citizens, many on horseback.
And there was no negotiation.
No. Sheriff Jim Clark's posse and Major John Cloud's troopers gave them a 2-minute warning to disperse. But almost immediately afterwards, they attacked. They fired tear gas, charged on horseback, and waded into the crowd, brutally beating the marchers with billy clubs and bullwhips.
And Lewis was right at the front.
Right at the front, he was knocked to the ground, beaten severely. A state trooper struck him on the head with a billy club, fracturing his skull. He thought he was going to die on that bridge.
The images are just chaotic. People choking on gas, being trampled, bleeding.
Utter chaos. Unarmed men, women, and even some children, dressed in their Sunday best for the march, being savagely attacked by law enforcement officers. It was a scene of pure terror. The source emphasizes that courage under fire, and you see it in Lewis, who, despite his injuries, managed to get back up to get others to safety.
What was the immediate aftermath for him, physically and emotionally?
Physically, a fractured skull, concussion, severe bruising. Emotionally, you can only imagine. But his commitment, even from his hospital bed later, was unwavering. He urged people to continue the struggle nonviolently.
What was the strategic thinking behind the Selma marches. Why Selma? Why then?
Selma and Dallas County, where it's located, was notorious for voter suppression. Despite years of organizing by SNCC and local activists, only about 2% of eligible black voters were registered. It was deliberately chosen as a place to dramatize the issue.
And the march to Montgomery.
It was intended to take the protest directly to Governor Wallace at the state capitol. It was a direct action tactic planned by SNCC, SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King's organization, and local groups to highlight the denial of voting rights and pressure the federal government to intervene.
So there was strategic planning behind confronting the violence they likely knew they would face.
Absolutely. This is what's fascinating and also chilling. The leaders, including Lewis and Dr. King — the King wasn't present on Bloody Sunday itself — understood the power of creative tension. They knew that nonviolent protest, when met with violent repression, could expose the brutality of the system to the nation and the world.
They deliberately turned violence into a catalyst for change, as the source puts it.
Yes. They knew news cameras would likely be there. They anticipated a violent response from Wallace's troopers and Clark's posse. The strategy, a painful one, was to absorb that violence nonviolently, thereby revealing the moral bankruptcy of segregation and forcing federal intervention. It was an incredibly risky but ultimately effective strategy.
And the impact of those images being broadcast nationwide.
It was immediate and profound. Americans saw, in black and white, peaceful citizens being brutally assaulted simply for trying to petition for their right to vote. The national outrage was overwhelming. People demonstrated in cities across the country in solidarity. Clergy members flew down to Selma.
It forced President Johnson's hand, didn't it?
Completely. The pressure became immense. Johnson addressed a joint session of Congress just days later, calling for the passage of a comprehensive Voting Rights Act. He even invoked the movement's own anthem, declaring, "We shall overcome."
A major turning point.
Huge. After another attempt, Turnaround Tuesday, where marchers again faced troopers but turned back under court order, Johnson federalized the Alabama National Guard to protect the marchers. The full march to Montgomery finally went ahead later that month, under federal protection.
And that successful march, culminating with Dr. King speaking on the steps of the state capitol, that must have felt like a monumental victory.
It was a defining moment, a symbol of the movement's resilience, its ability to withstand incredible violence, and ultimately compel the federal government to uphold its citizens' rights. It showed that their strategy, their sacrifice, was working.
So what does this whole Selma chapter signify? Resilience, yes, but also that drive for tangible results, for legislation.
Exactly. It showed the power of direct action to create political will. Bloody Sunday, as horrific as it was, became the direct catalyst for the passage of the Voting Rights Act just a few months later.
And it really underscores Lewis's personal sacrifice again. That fractured skull wasn't symbolic.
Not at all. The physical and emotional toll of this kind of activism, as depicted so vividly in March, was immense. These were real injuries, real trauma, real fear. Lewis carried the scars, literal and figurative, for the rest of his life.
And again, Aydin's narrative structure helps us understand the strategy, the context, while Lewis's voice gives us the visceral human experience.
It's that combination that makes the book so powerful. It immerses you in the danger, the pain, but also the profound sense of purpose and eventual triumph.
Which brings us finally to that triumph.
Yeah.
The passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act.
A truly landmark piece of legislation, a hard-won victory.
The central legislative achievement of the civil rights movement, arguably. The culmination of all the struggles we've been talking about: Birmingham Freedom Summer, the MFDP challenge, Selma.
Absolutely. It was the direct result of years of sacrifice, lobbying, protest, and bloodshed by John Lewis and countless others, sung and unsung heroes.
So let's really unpack this, as you say. What specifically did the Voting Rights Act do? How did it actually change things on the ground in places like Mississippi and Alabama?
It was revolutionary because it had teeth. Unlike previous civil rights laws that were often easily circumvented, the VRA directly targeted the discriminatory practices used for decades.
Like the literacy tests.
Exactly. Section 2 of the Act applied nationwide, banning any voting qualification or prerequisite to voting, or standard practice or procedure, imposed or applied, to deny or abridge the right of any citizen of the United States to vote on account of race or color. This explicitly outlawed literacy tests and similar devices.
Okay, that's crucial. What else?
Even more impactful initially were Sections 4 and 5. Section 4 established a formula to identify specific states and counties, mostly in the South, with a history of egregious voting discrimination.
Based on low voter registration or turnout numbers and the use of tests or devices.
Precisely. And for those jurisdictions identified by Section 4, Section 5 imposed a requirement called preclearance.
Preclearance, what does that mean?
It meant that these covered jurisdictions could not make any changes to their voting laws or procedures, no matter how small, from moving a polling place to changing district lines to enacting a new voter ID law without first getting approval or preclearance from the U.S. Department of Justice or a federal court in D.C.
Wow, so the federal government had to sign off beforehand.
Yes. The burden was on the jurisdiction to prove that the proposed change would not have a discriminatory purpose or effect. This was incredibly powerful. It stopped discriminatory changes before they could be implemented and harm voters.
And the impact was immediate.
Dramatic. Black voter registration and turnout rates soared across the South in the years immediately following 1965. Suddenly, millions of Black citizens who had been disenfranchised for generations could finally participate meaningfully in the democratic process. It fundamentally reshapes the political landscape of the South and the nation.
It sounds like the definitive victory, the end of that particular struggle.
It was a monumental victory, absolutely, a turning point. But, and this is a crucial point that Lewis and Aydin emphasize in March, the struggle didn't end there. They highlight the fragility of this progress.
Fragility. How so? The act seems so strong.
Because voting rights, like all civil rights, require constant vigilance and defense. Those who seek to restrict access to the ballot are persistent and adaptable. And the act itself, particularly the preclearance provision, face legal challenges almost immediately.
And this connects directly to our present, doesn't it? There's a major, relatively recent, live example of this fragility.
Tragically, yes. The foresight shown in March became painfully relevant in 2013 with the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County v. Holder.
Can you explain what happened in that case? Many people might have heard the name but might not know the details.
Certainly. The Shelby County case challenged the constitutionality of Sections 4 and 5, the coverage formula, and the preclearance requirement. Shelby County, Alabama, argued that the conditions that existed in 1965 to justify preclearance no longer applied, that the formula was outdated and unfairly singled out certain states based on decades-old data.
And the Supreme Court agreed.
In a 5-4 decision, yes. The court didn't strike down Section 5, the preclearance requirement itself, directly, but it did strike down Section 4B, the coverage formula.
The formula that determined which jurisdictions were covered by Section 5.
Exactly. The court essentially said the formula was unconstitutional because it was based on old data and didn't reflect the racial progress made since 1965. They said Congress needed to create a new formula based on current conditions if it wanted preclearance to continue.
But Congress hasn't done that, have they?
No. Partisan gridlock has prevented Congress from agreeing on a new coverage formula. So the practical effect of the Shelby County decision was to render Section 5 largely inoperable. Preclearance is essentially gone unless Congress acts.
So what were the immediate consequences? Did states start changing laws right away?
Immediately. Literally within hours of the decision. Texas announced it would implement a strict photo ID law that had previously been blocked under Section 5 preclearance because it was found to disproportionately affect minority voters.
Wow, hours.
Yes. North Carolina followed soon after with a sweeping package of voting restrictions, cutting early voting days, eliminating same-day registration, implementing a strict photo ID requirement, which courts later found targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision. Many other formerly covered states also moved to enact stricter voter ID laws, purge voter rolls more aggressively, close polling places in minority neighborhoods, and reduce early voting opportunities.
So the very protections deemed necessary in 1965 because of a history of discrimination were removed, and then actions that arguably disenfranchised minority voters followed swiftly.
Precisely. It underscores that fragility Lewis and Aydin warned about. It shows how a hard-won victory, even one as significant as the Voting Rights Act, can be significantly weakened by judicial interpretation and political inaction.
Connecting this back to March, Lewis and Aydin's narrative, finishing with this sense of ongoing struggle, feels incredibly prescient now.
It absolutely does. It highlights that the fight for voting rights isn't a closed chapter in a history book. It's a continuous, dynamic struggle. The tactics may change from literacy tests and poll taxes to strict voter ID laws and polling place closures, but the goal of restricting access for certain populations often persists.
It makes Lewis's own life journey even more remarkable, doesn't it? from being a sharecropper's son in Pike County, Alabama, facing down troopers on that bridge, to serving nearly 35 years in the U.S. Congress, becoming known as the conscience of the Congress.
His life story is just incredible. It embodies the entire arc of the struggle, the depths of oppression, the courage of resistance, the achievement of significant progress through sacrifice, and the lifelong commitment to defending those gains.
How does that journey, ending the book with him as a congressman still fighting these battles, inspire action today? What's the lesson there?
I think the lesson is profound persistence. His life shows that change is possible, even against incredible odds, but it requires unwavering commitment over the long haul. It's not about one protest or one election. It's about dedicating your life to the principles of justice and equality.
And working both outside and inside the system.
Exactly. He was a radical activist who risked his life nonviolently confronting injustice, and he became a skilled legislator working within the halls of power to enact and protect civil rights. His consistent message urging people to get in good trouble, necessary trouble, resonates powerfully today.
It's a call to not be passive bystanders.
Precisely. It empowers current generations to recognize that their engagement, their voices, their votes are crucial. His life is proof that individual commitment, multiplied across communities, can bend that arc toward justice, but it needs constant tending.
Which brings us to the feeling at the end of March. Book 3. It's not despairing, but it's definitely sobering, isn't it? It leaves you with work to do.
Yes, the tone is hopeful in celebrating the victories, but deeply sobering in its reminder that the fight continues. It's a call to vigilance.
Vigilance in protecting democratic rights today.
Indeed. The book doesn't just recount history, it passes the torch. It implicitly asks you, the listener, the reader, what does it mean for you to be a vigilant citizen now, in your community, in this country? How do you uphold the principles that John Lewis and so many others sacrificed so much for?
It pushes us to look beyond the headlines, doesn't it? To understand the ongoing, often less dramatic, but equally important, work needed to protect and expand voting rights for everyone.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that securing a more perfect union is not a destination, but a continuous process.
So, reflecting on our deep dive today, we've traced this incredible path through March. Book 3, the unimaginable horror of the Birmingham bombing, the perilous hope of Freedom Summer, the political battles of the DNC, the brutal courage shown at Selma, and the landmark victory yet fragile legacy of the Voting Rights Act.
It's a journey marked by immense courage, strategic brilliance, devastating losses, and hard-won gains.
And the central message, echoing through it all, seems to be that the civil rights movement isn't just past history. It's a living legacy, with roots deeply entangled in the challenges we still face.
Absolutely. Which leads us to a final thought, a provocative question for you to consider as you move forward from this discussion.
Okay.
So what does this all mean for you, personally? As we reflect on the incredible sacrifices made by John Lewis's generation to secure voting rights and greater equality, really think about this. In what specific ways do the battles they fought still echo in the challenges we face today in securing a more perfect union? And perhaps more importantly, what is your role, however big or small, in that ongoing narrative?
That's a powerful question to sit with. What's my role? What is your role?
It encourages us all to continue our own learning, our own deep dives into these crucial topics, and to actively apply the lessons of the past to the present.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into March, Book 3. We hope it was as insightful and moving for you as it was for us to discuss.
We encourage you to share your own aha moments or reflections from this conversation. What stood out to you? What questions does it raise?
And please, if you found value in this discussion, remember to like, subscribe, and share BookPodCastZone. Your support really does help us keep these important conversations going. Stay tuned for more deep dives. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep making a difference.
Goodbye for now.